Gongji, our filthy loser, was sitting with his friends in a restaurant when his status window appeared, revealing that he had been assigned a mission which required him to complete a yoga session with the heroine within a given time. He felt extremely confused, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. His friends continued their casual discussion, one of them remarking that something was fine with him, while another expressed surprise and questioned the statement, addressing him in a friendly manner. Although Gongji found the situation to be ridiculous, he could not deny that it was directly tied to his life. Among the group of friends, one of them named Jungsil, who also happened to be a heroine, inquired about what was troubling him. Another companion named No Yejoo, who was also counted among the heroines, voiced her curiosity as well, addressing him warmly and asking if he had something to confess so that the matter could be clarified. Gongji, however, responded with nervous laughter and insisted that there was nothing wrong. Park Gongji, who was not only a regular young man but also classified as a non-player character in this world, sat among them uneasily. Another of his friends, Kim Namju, who held the role of the main character, also questioned Gongji about his unusual behavior and encouraged him to accompany them. Gongji wondered aloud if he really should join, but internally he regarded Kim Namju as the biggest complication in his situation. Still, he reluctantly agreed, addressing Namju by name and confirming that he would go along. While Namju continued speaking casually, Gongji's status window reappeared before him, this time warning that if he failed his mission, he would collapse and disappear altogether. He felt deeply unsettled by this message and reflected in alarm on how he had become entangled in such circumstances. Concluding that he needed to complete a resistance band session as soon as possible, he distracted himself by eating alongside his three friends. His mind soon drifted to his past, when he had been nothing more than an ordinary young man living in Korea and casually scrolling through his phone. He remembered having been intrigued by a new webtoon and thinking of its artist as remarkably creative. At that time, he had been in his 20s, jobless, and wearing glasses. One memory in particular stood out. He had been walking while reading a webtoon on his phone and had thought to himself that his review would gain attention if he posted it immediately. While preparing the review, he received a message from Hana, who remarked that it had been a long time since they had spoken and that she needed to talk. He recalled how, while still absorbed in reading that message, he had been struck by a truck on the road. He believed his life should have ended at that point, yet instead he was left with dizziness and an overwhelming mix of feelings that made no sense. Not long after the accident, he found himself again with his phone, wondering if what had happened had only been a delusion. A driver then shouted at him for standing in the middle of the road and ordered him to move aside. Realizing he was indeed standing dangerously in traffic, he apologized quickly to the taxi driver and walked away in confusion, unable to understand what had happened. He recalled how he had then seen another truck speeding toward him, yet when he reached for his glasses, he realized they were missing. The strangest part was that despite not wearing glasses, his vision was perfectly clear. This shocked him, as his body also felt different, almost as though it did not belong to him. To confirm, he opened the front camera of his phone and was horrified when the reflection revealed a bland and unfamiliar face, that of a non-player character. His loud exclamation startled the people around him, who began staring. Embarrassed, he quickly quieted himself and reflected that he had reacted too strongly in public. As he walked away, he considered his life up until then. He had been an unemployed young man in his 20s, with the most interesting part of his daily routine being the reading of webtoons and playing games. He had recently become so invested in webtoons that he even started writing reviews. Moments before his accident, he had been about to upload one such review, but everything had suddenly changed. He tried to reason through it and realized that he might have been transported into an isekai-like situation. However, since the world around him still contained cars and phones, it was not a typical fantasy setting. Still, he reminded himself that even in modern fantasy worlds, portals could open, monsters could appear, and hunters could emerge. The memory of the truck running over him brought back the unbearable sensation of pain, and he resolved that he never wanted to experience that again, not even at the hands of a monster. To test his suspicion, he stopped on a quiet street and tried to summon a status window, knowing it to be a common feature in reincarnation stories. When nothing appeared, he grew anxious, worrying that this might not be the kind of world he thought it was. He debated whether it was possession, reincarnation, or modern fantasy, but nothing made sense. Then, to his relief, a status window suddenly began loading before his eyes. Once it fully appeared, he felt a strange sense of awe, noting how surreal it was to see what what he had only read about countless times in webtoons. The window displayed his current status as being very normal. This confused him further, as he had hoped it would provide more clarity. It listed his personal information, including his name, Park Gongji, and his age as 20 years old. Although he appreciated the idea of being young again, he was disheartened to see how low his statistics were. He also noticed a mention of a battle pass card, which seemed strange to him, yet it existed within this reality. His class was listed as a side character, which made him recall his new role as a non-player character. He observed the people around him, noting especially the women whose revealing outfits seemed excessive, and gradually began to piece together the truth. It dawned on him that he had entered the very manhwa he had been reading, a long-running campus harem story that had dominated the charts on Mixtu but had recently started slipping in popularity due to its increasingly boring plot. He reflected that while becoming a character inside a webtoon was somewhat common, being assigned the role of an insignificant non-player character was far rarer. At first, he thought that this at least meant he would not have to worry about death, but on second thought, he recognized that in a manhwa, unpredictable and dangerous things could still happen. As he continued thinking, he noticed a girl nearby who wore a butterfly hairpin and fashionable clothing. He immediately recognized her as Jung-sil, one of the heroines of the webtoon. In his mind, he acknowledged that she was even more beautiful than he had imagined, which explained why the main character of the story had always been so excited to see her. When she approached him and greeted him warmly, he found himself unable to respond properly, overwhelmed by her friendliness and beauty. His face grew red as shyness overtook him, and he silently struggled with how to react. He started following her. He imagined that life on a campus inside a manhwa could turn out to be amazing, and he initially resolved to enjoy his new life while carefully avoiding any troublesome situations like NTR. However, his confidence crumbled when his status window displayed a threatening condition. Unless he managed to get promoted to the rank of a side character within the allotted time, he would completely disappear. He found himself questioning what disappear could possibly mean, wondering whether it implied death, erasure, or something even worse. As he followed Jung-sil along the road, he began worrying that something as trivial as declining to have dinner with her could lead to his demise. His presence had already been downgraded from a supporting character to a non-player character, and he could not comprehend how to rebuild that presence. He instinctively touched the glowing surface of the status window, trying to find an answer, and discovered a tip written on it. Success in missions would reward him with a significant increase in presence, allowing him to rank up. The window also presented him with an option to accept the mission, which he immediately selected. The moment he did, a new message appeared, instructing him to observe the undergarments of a heroine class character. He was overwhelmed with embarrassment as he read those words, his face burning with shame. He wondered what kind of absurd mission had been given to him, questioning whether this was simply the twisted logic of being trapped inside a manhwa. As he continued walking distractedly, he accidentally collided shoulder to shoulder with no Yejoo. Startled, he quickly apologized, but she turned toward him with visible irritation, telling him to watch where he was going. She reminded him that he was from their club, though she had already forgotten his name, and she referred to him casually as a junior. Introducing himself, he stated that his name was Park Gongji, to which she responded by remarking that the name suited him well enough. She then asserted her seniority and warned him that she would overlook his mistake this time. In his thoughts, Gongji grumbled that she had been the one who ran into him, not the other way around, though he refrained from saying anything aloud. He reflected on how her personality seemed difficult, but at the same time, he could not deny that she possessed the beauty of a top-tier K-pop idol, the kind admired by many readers of the manhwa. He recalled how fans of the story had eagerly awaited her discipline scene during the notorious morning burn session. Realizing her status as a heroine, he suddenly understood that he did not necessarily have to target Jung-sil to complete his mission, since no Yejoo also qualified. Considering that she wore a skirt, unlike Jung-sil who had been in pants, he thought it might even be easier to succeed with her. Yet as the idea formed, the dangerous consequences also became clear in his mind. He worried that if he acted recklessly, he could be arrested for inappropriate behavior, which would surely end his chances of ever improving his presence. Prison would mean complete failure, and disappearance would follow. As the timer on his mission continued to tick down, Panic set in. He knew he could not simply waste time doing nothing, so he rushed forward with the determination to locate Jungsil again. After some time, he succeeded in finding himself seated with Jungsil in a small restaurant, sharing a meal of taeokbokki. Together they prepared the dish, waiting for it to boil, and he commented that it just needed a little more time. She agreed with enthusiasm, while he secretly thought about how fortunate it was that he had remembered her obsession with the webtoon. Watching her cheerful expression as she eagerly anticipated the dish, he could not help but think that the sight of her waiting was almost unbearably cute. As he observed her, he reminded himself of his mission, yet felt torn. Though his objective was to glimpse her undergarments, he found it absurd to even attempt such a thing in this setting. Jungsil's cheerful smile, her simple apron, and her jeans placed her in what he mentally described as total defense mode. There was no possible way for him to succeed unless she undressed of her own accord, which was unthinkable. Both Gongji and Jungsil eventually arrived at the travel club room, where they sat together inside. Gongji's thoughts immediately grew heavy, as he considered how dire his situation had become. He told himself that it was fortunate no one else was around, but at the same time, he wrestled with the impossible question of how he could possibly complete his mission when Jungsil was wearing jeans. The timer on his status window continued to tick down mercilessly, each passing second tightening the knot of anxiety in his chest. He admitted inwardly that there was no time left to hesitate. A choice had to be made. Either he would accomplish his task through Jungsil, or he would have to turn to another heroine instead. His expression betrayed his confusion, though he tried to appear calm. In an effort to distract himself, he put his galaxy buds into his ears, convincing himself that he had reached a decision. However, as though fate were mocking him, one of the earbuds slipped from his hand and rolled across the floor, landing behind the chair where Jungsil sat. Caught off guard, he blurted out an exclamation about his hand slipping, making it seem as though it had been an accident. Jungsil, preoccupied but attentive, noticed where the earbud had landed and offered to pick it up for him. Embarrassed, he insisted that it was unnecessary, but she dismissed his objection and told him to remain seated, since the buds had fallen right beside her. With a tone of mild curiosity, she questioned how the earbuds could have flown so far from his hand in the first place. As she bent down to retrieve them, Gongji forced a nervous laugh and muttered that perhaps his fingers were unusually strong. Watching her move, Gongji's thoughts grew conflicted. He felt a pang of guilt toward Jungsil, telling himself that what he was about to do was unfair. Still, he rationalized that it was the only way to survive, since failing to complete the mission would mean disappearing entirely. He reassured himself that even if she was wearing jeans, the act of squatting might still reveal enough to count as a success in the system's eyes. Apologizing to her in his mind, he prepared himself for the outcome, repeating that he had no choice. Yet, as he focused on the scene before him, confusion clouded his observations. From his angle, all he could see was her back, with no further detail revealed. He leaned forward slightly, perplexed as to why nothing else could be seen. The questions rushed through his mind that had her undergarments somehow slipped, or was she not wearing any at all? He doubted this possibility, reminding himself that she had never been portrayed in the manhwa as someone so revealing. He wondered if he was simply missing the angle or if the system itself was interfering with his perception. The clubroom door suddenly swung open. No Yejoo entered, holding her phone in her hand. Before she could act, Jungsil instinctively turned in the same direction, and the sudden movement caused her to collide with Yejoo. The impact left Yejoo stumbling, nearly falling to the floor. At that instant, the scene unfolded in such a way that Gongji found himself staring at the moment, which seemed to perfectly align with the mission's requirement. His heart raced with shock and disbelief, as he realized that he might have actually achieved success of seeing her undergarments, something he had desperately chased under the threat of disappearing. Suddenly, Gongji noticed a change on his status window that immediately drew his attention. The message indicated that his success had been restricted, explaining that the particular cliché he had been attempting was reserved exclusively for the main character class. A wave of surprise and confusion washed over him, and he tried to process what this limitation could mean. Almost immediately, another message appeared on the status window, providing more detail. He could be locked into a passive cliché, another advantage meant only for the main character. It stated further that eye candy events occurred with a high probability for the main character, whereas other classes needed to unlock the skill themselves. Gongji's sense of disbelief intensified as he struggled to comprehend the system and its peculiarities, feeling an unsettling mixture of frustration and helplessness. At the same time, both Jungsil and Yejoo had fallen to the floor during the earlier commotion. However, Gongji remained deeply absorbed in his thoughts, analyzing the strange turn of events. He wondered whether the webtoon itself had imposed this strange restriction simply because he was not the main character. Jungsil, who had been carefully observing the scene, moved closer to Yejoo to check her condition. She demonstrated concern and attentiveness, trying to determine whether Yejoo had suffered serious harm. Yejoo, still lying on the floor, insisted that she only required help to get back on her feet, extending her hands to allow assistance. Gongji stepped forward to aid her. Noticing that her legs displayed visible bruising and tenderness, evidence of the impact that had clearly caused some discomfort. As he helped her stand, Jungsil's attention was drawn to a trickle of blood on Yejoo's legs. She tried to downplay it, claiming it was only a minor sting and requested a tissue to wipe it clean. Jungsil, however, immediately cautioned that neglecting to treat the wound properly could lead to scarring. She left the club room to retrieve something sterilized to clean the injury. Gongji remained behind with Yejoo, feeling a growing sense of responsibility and concern. Simultaneously, frustration bubbled within him as he realized he had already lost the chance to complete his mission concerning her undergarments. Being a non-main character rendered the task impossible, leaving him conflicted. His thoughts, however, returned to Yejoo's bleeding legs, which confirmed that she was far from unhurt. He recognized that she was masking her pain with her usual pride and toughness, but beneath the surface, she remained vulnerable and in need of care. This duality reminded him of the Yejoo Sunbae he had always known, outwardly resilient and proud, yet secretly soft and sensitive. Gongji tried to recall a specific episode from the webtoon involving an injury, hoping that the memory would guide him in offering effective assistance. As the recollection surfaced, he realized the correct approach. He instructed Yejoo to hold still while he prepared to attend to her wound. He began searching through a luggage bag in the corner of the room, noting that, although it belonged to another character, it contained a first aid kit that had been used in similar situations previously. He retrieved the box and readied the antiseptic, mentally preparing to clean the injury carefully, while asking Yejoo to remain patient for a moment. Yejoo insisted that she was fine and continued to brush off his concern, but Gongji recalled Jungsil's warning and emphasized the importance of proper care, knowing that improper treatment could cause permanent marks. He also observed her maintaining her tough exterior, masking discomfort that was clearly present. A fleeting thought crossed his mind that if she turned her back slightly while he applied the antiseptic, he might still complete his mission without being noticed. Yejoo seemed to notice his movements, but made no comment, observing quietly as he worked with careful attention. Despite the temptation to glance at her undergarments, Gongji prioritized attending to her injury, recognizing the importance of helping her first. Yejoo, ever impatient, urged him to finish quickly, claiming that the injury was minor. Gongji continued his work, quietly requesting her to remain still for a few more moments. Eventually, Yejoo acquiesced, indicating that she could endure the care being administered. Once the antiseptic was applied, he carefully prepared the bandages, fully aware that this might be his last opportunity to complete the mission involving her undergarments. He considered the potential consequences if he failed, reminding himself that failure could be fatal in this peculiar world. Keeping an eye on the limited time remaining, he began placing the bandages over her legs, all the while reminding her not to walk while distracted by her phone. Internally, he scolded himself, thinking how strange it felt to lecture her in such a situation, yet recognizing it was necessary. Yejoo reacted sharply, questioning his tone and expression, which prompted him to clarify that he was only trying to be cautious. Her unexpected irritability surprised him, leaving him momentarily confused about her sudden change in demeanor. Their conversation shifted toward assigning responsibility for the incident. Yejoo argued that Jungsil's position near the entrance had contributed to the accident, while Gongji reminded her that she had collided with him while distracted by her phone. The exchange continued, with Yejoo teasingly asserting that she had brought the injury upon herself and questioning whether Gongji derived any satisfaction from this fact. Gongji, careful not to appear superior, insisted that he had no such intentions. Unexpectedly, Yejoo addressed a lingering tension, pointing out that she had noticed him glancing at her skirt. She revealed that she was wearing shorts underneath, implying that he could discreetly look without causing offense. Gongji's mind raced as he realized that the timer indicated only 3 minutes remained. When he cautiously glanced, he confirmed that she had proper undergarments. At that moment, the status window updated, signaling that his mission had been successfully completed. He was gazing at her with a mix of curiosity and disbelief, silently concluding that she had a nature both aggressive and irritable. At the same time, he admitted inwardly that she was equally impulsive, quick to act without much thought. Yet, even with those traits, what surprised him most was discovering just how clumsy she could be. Despite all her blunders, it turned out that her careless antics had unintentionally helped him accomplish his mission. While he was still reflecting on that, she continued speaking to him, teasing in her usual tone. She told him that getting flustered by a few casual shots was exactly what one could expect from someone like him, a PB. He found it strange that she had shortened the term in such a way, though he did not say it aloud. She then declared that the matter was settled and warned him not to lecture his seniors on how to live their lives. At that moment, the door opened, and Jungseal entered the club room looking rather worried. She approached Yejoo and explained that she had brought her some medicine. As she glanced down, she also noticed that Yejoo's legs were covered in small bandages. Concerned, she asked where Yejoo had gotten them from. Gongji interjected, saying that he had looked around the room and managed to find a first aid kit. Jungseal immediately praised him, saying that was very thoughtful of him. Before anyone could add more, Kim Namju suddenly entered the room as well. He stopped for a moment, observing the scene with confusion, and asked why everyone was gathered together in that way. Jungseal quickly explained that she had been crouching near the door to pick something up, and Yejoo had tripped over her. As a result, they had all been trying to give Yejoo some basic first aid. Gongji glanced at Namju, silently acknowledging his presence, and thought to himself that now the main character had arrived. He reminded himself that he truly had done very little, merely patched her up. Namju, however, seemed unconvinced. He asked aloud how anyone could even manage to fall in a place like that. Jungseal answered honestly, explaining that it had just been unfortunate timing. She had been kneeling near the door, and Yejoo had stumbled over her. Namju pressed further, suggesting that Yejoo had probably been walking while staring at her phone, and because she had not paid attention, she ended up getting hurt. Gongji silently noted that Namju's tendency to lecture people always showed itself, as if he was obsessed with being right. He reflected that if Namju were not the main character, such self-righteousness would probably earn him a lifetime pass to constant arguments. Yejoo, on the other hand, grew visibly angry at the accusation. She retorted sharply, saying that people like him were what others referred to as smartphone zombies, individuals too absorbed in their screens to notice their surroundings. Namju remained unmoved, questioning why she was getting so angry when it was her own fault. Yejoo, frustrated, yelled at him to be quiet and even attempted to strike him in her fury. However, in her reckless movement, she lost her balance and fell to the ground instead. Namju told her she should not charge at him like that, though even he appeared surprised to see her suddenly lying on the floor. Yejoo, humiliated and furious, cursed at him. Gongji, watching the entire scene, thought with irony that such an accidental glimpse of her undergarments felt wasted on him. He wondered if this was the natural advantage of being the main character. Such moments happened easily and effortlessly for Namju, unlike for someone like himself, a mere extra. That night, Yejoo returned to her room, collapsed on her bed, and muttered to herself that she was exhausted. She thought back to earlier, remembering how Namju had so effortlessly avoided her while making her look foolish. She reflected that she had tried to be civil, but he had always been such a peculiar person, someone who believed he could say anything as long as he was technically correct. Even though she had been hurt, he had not once asked if she was all right. She had not expected such coldness from him. By contrast, she recalled how her junior had at least shown some care, tending to her with the first aid kit. She admitted to herself that he seemed different from Namju in that regard. Meanwhile, Gongji was in his own room, brushing his teeth in front of the bathroom mirror when his status window appeared before him. It displayed a message stating that Yejoo's attraction toward him has increased by 5. He was taken aback, utterly puzzled by this sudden change. He wondered what exactly this meant and why such a thing would happen so unexpectedly, especially so late at night. In her own room, Yejoo thought about the day's events. She decided she should wash up and go to bed, but as she reflected, she realized she had not worn shorts that day due to the rain and her lack of time to do laundry. Suddenly, a flashback of the embarrassing earlier scene, when her undergarments had been exposed, came to mind. The realization struck her with shock and embarrassment. At the same time, Gongji's status window appeared once again. This time, it showed that Yejoo's attraction had decreased by 5 points. He was left bewildered, questioning why her attraction would go up and down so erratically without reason. The following day, Gongji left a message in the group chat, asking if anyone wanted to join him for dinner that night. Jungsil promptly responded that she would go, and Gongji felt relieved. He had feared being ignored, but Jungsil's kindness reassured him. He reminded himself that staying close to the main character was important if he wished to maintain his presence, and he decided he needed to keep finding ways to cross paths with them. To his surprise, Kim Namju also replied that he would join, and then Yejoo sent a response agreeing as well. Gongji stared at his phone, astonished that both of them had agreed. He reflected on his past habits, how he always used to eat lunch alone, and realized that perhaps things did not have to be that way. If only someone had asked him sooner, he would have gladly accepted. Just as he was musing over this, his status window appeared again, displaying that his current state was relaxed. He thought it was probably thanks to completing yesterday's mission. The window further informed him that his class was currently side character, but that he might be demoted. Relieved, he acknowledged that he had been promoted back to side character status thanks to clearing the mission. He then clicked on the claim button for rewards. Immediately, another notice appeared showing that the mission points rewarded. He received 5 points, which has been added to his attributes. He was confused, comparing it to video games, where players receive points to distribute across their stats. 5 did not seem like much, especially since most of his averages were below 3. He wondered whether to put them into appearance or stamina, trying to figure out the best option. His thoughts were interrupted when he met up with the group later. Jungsil greeted him warmly, saying they had all coincidentally met on the way there. Gongji thought to himself that this was exactly the kind of thing that always happened around the main character. They all naturally gravitated together. Jungsil asked if he had been waiting long, and he replied that he had just arrived, though internally he reminded himself that he could never become the protagonist. He was content with not disappearing entirely. Still, he could not help noticing that Yejoo, whose attraction points toward him had been fluctuating wildly, seemed visibly embarrassed, perhaps recalling her earlier slip about not wearing shorts. As soon as they entered the restaurant, the manager greeted them and asked how many people were in their party. Jungsil politely responded that there were 4. They sat together and Namju quickly grabbed the menu, wondering aloud what was good to eat there. Gongji suggested stir-fried pork if he was uncertain and offered to order 2 portions of the same with him. Namju agreed, and Gongji, satisfied, thought that sharing a meal together might be enough to keep his presence intact. He passed the menu to the girls, assuring himself that he had nothing to worry about now. Jungsil accepted it gratefully, thanking him. Suddenly, Gongji was startled when his status window appeared again without being summoned. It announced that he had a new weekly mission, warning that if he failed to complete it, his presence would begin to fade. He sighed, thinking that he simply had to keep fulfilling these tasks, but then the next part appeared, and his eyes widened. The mission demanded that he kiss the heroine in front of the main character. The absurdity of it left him stunned. He wondered with dread whether he truly had to go through with such a thing right before the main character's eyes. He considered the mission displayed before him and immediately thought that it was utterly ridiculous. Jungsil was looking through the menu, about to place an order, when she turned toward Yejoo and asked if she wanted to try the soft tofu dish. Yejoo, however, remained distracted with her phone, barely glancing up, and casually replied that she did not mind, so Jungsil should just order what she preferred. Gongji, seated beside Namju, could not ignore the mission lingering in his mind. He reminded himself of the exact words. He was supposed to kiss the heroines in front of the main character. His eyes shifted slightly toward Namju, who sat right next to him, and he felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. The mission had not specified just one heroine, but both, and the thought of carrying it out made him feel increasingly uneasy. When the food arrived, everyone seemed eager to start eating. The table filled with warm dishes, rich aromas rising into the air. Jungsil looked at the meal happily and commented that it looked delicious, wishing everyone bon appétit. The others echoed her words before beginning to eat together. Just as Gongji was about to take his first bite, his status window interrupted him again, asking whether he wanted to forfeit the mission. Without hesitation, he clicked the option for yes. Inwardly, he reasoned with himself. There was no need to cling to a mission that was clearly impossible from the start. The male lead already had feelings for the heroines, and now the sixth was expecting him to kiss them in front of Namju. Even someone with the image of a charming bad boy would not be able to pull something like that off, let alone him. It was unreasonable to begin with. There was simply no way he could accomplish it. Almost immediately, the window updated, showing that his presence had decreased and his class had been demoted to non-player character. He stared at the message in frustration, silently begging the system to at least assign him a mission within reach. While he was lost in these troubling thoughts, Jung-sil noticed his distracted expression. With a look of concern, she asked if something was wrong, remarking that he did not look very well. He quickly forced a laugh, brushing it off, and told her it was nothing, perhaps just nerves over tomorrow's presentation. She nodded with understanding, telling him that could certainly unsettle someone subconsciously, and encouraged him to feel free to talk about anything that was bothering him. Her gentle tone and kindness made him blush, and he reflected again on how she was always considerate toward him. Yet even then, his eyes flickered back to the status window that would not leave him alone. He thought irritably that if it insisted on assigning missions, it should at least give him something possible. This time, the system presented 2 new missions. The first instructed him to earn 5 or more affection points with heroine number 1, while the second simply stated, "It's just the alcohol. Get drinks with heroine number 2. Seeing these, Gongji finally felt some relief. These tasks were far more manageable compared to the outrageous kissing mission. He leaned back slightly, scanning the menu once more, and thought that since the restaurant served alcohol, the mission might just work out if he guided the conversation properly. By then, everyone had nearly finished their meals. Jung-sil sighed contentedly, saying that the food was so tasty she had ended up eating more than she expected, and now she felt as though she might have gained weight. Gongji observed her, noting how natural her comment sounded, but his attention shifted when Namju responded. Namju reassured her that people did not gain weight that quickly. Gongji thought to himself that Namju always knew the right words, the perfect, reassuring line, fitting for the role of the male lead. Jung-sil, though, blushed lightly, insisting that she had only said she felt like she had gained weight, not that she actually had. Namju, instead of stopping there, began explaining in a serious tone that weight gain was linked to the conversion of glucose into body fat. He elaborated that unprocessed glucose was first stored in the muscles as glycogen, and only later would it convert into fat if one failed to control diet and exercise. Gongji sat there in disbelief, thinking that Namju really had no end to his explanations and trivia. He silently thanked the heavens that Namju was the main character. Anyone else giving such a drawn-out reply would have been unbearable. That thought sparked an idea, and he suddenly excused himself, asking the waiter to bring a bottle of cloud beer while announcing that he needed to use the restroom. Jung-sil blinked in surprise, wondering why he had done that so abruptly, but he had already slipped away. As he walked toward the bathroom, Gongji pieced his thought together more clearly. He recalled the mission's wording, which was to get drinks with heroine number 2. If this were a language-style question, then perhaps it did not mean he had to personally drink alcohol with her. It might simply mean that as long as drinks were ordered and placed on the table, the condition would be satisfied. Inside the restroom, he confirmed his reasoning and waited for the window's response. True enough, the status window appeared, informing him that he was correct. It displayed the message that mission succeeded. It is just the alcohol. With satisfaction, he clicked to check the rewards. A surge of relief washed over him, and he thought to himself that he had managed to succeed in completing the second mission after all. Reflecting on it, he mused about the mysterious being behind these missions. Whoever or whatever it was, it had a strange way of alternating between giving him utterly absurd, impossible tasks and surprisingly easy ones. The new task simply required him to build 5 affection points with heroine number 1. He thought optimistically that if he played his cards right, he could manage that much more easily. When Gongji returned to the table, he placed the newly arrived beer in front of him and announced lightly that it had come, inviting the others to have some if they wished. Jung-sil looked at him with mild surprise, admitting that he had startled her with that sudden order and asked if he truly liked beer that much. Gongji replied casually that he did, explaining that he had simply been craving it. Before the moment could linger, Namju interjected, stating in his usual calm and matter-of-fact way, that it was always healthier to drink after eating rather than before. Jung-sil then redirected the discussion, suggesting that they pause for a bit so Gongji could enjoy his beer. As she did, she brought up the topic of their club trip, wondering aloud if planning it would not be rather difficult. Namju dismissed her worry almost instantly, claiming there was nothing difficult about it. He explained confidently that everything could be found online, with countless YouTube travel blogs to follow, and that modern AI was advanced enough to create itineraries in seconds if asked. Gongji immediately perked up at this opportunity, realizing he could contribute here. He admitted aloud that it had been difficult for him as well, confessing that the abundance of options frustrated him. He pointed out that, since he had little experience traveling, he had no idea how to choose. Hearing this, Jung-sil smiled in relief and admitted she was the same, confessing she had never planned a trip before either. Gongji glanced at her and thought that her words revealed an endless well of relatability, the kind one would expect from someone with an MBTI F-type personality. He recognized that this was his chance. His relatability could be used to boost affection points. After all, he had invested all his recently earned mission points into the skill known as Gift of the Gab. Just then, the status window appeared before him again, showing his statistics. Gongji reflected with satisfaction that he had made the right decision earlier in the bathroom when he had gone all in with his points. Thanks to that, he had even unlocked a passive skill called relatability, which allowed him to connect easily with whomever he was speaking to. He realized now how unexpectedly lucky this bonus had been. By mirroring an F-type personality and empathizing with others, his affection points kept steadily increasing. He noticed he had already accumulated 4 points with Jung-sil alone. At that moment, however, the conversation turned toward Yejoo when Jung-sil asked her opinion. She pointed out that Yejoo, being a second-year student, must surely have some experience with trip planning. Gongji groaned inwardly at the shift, frustrated that he had only needed 1 more point, and now the focus had moved to someone else. Yejoo responded confidently, saying that she did not find such things difficult, though she admitted that newcomers like them might indeed struggle. Jung-sil agreed with her observation and asked politely if she could give them any tips. Yejoo leaned back, almost smirking, and told them bluntly that asking her for advice was pointless because they would be rejected anyway, no matter what. According to her, the best approach was to prepare a passable plan, then rely on tips from seniors to fix the flaws. During this, Namju's phone rang, and he excused himself, telling the caller he was with his friends before stepping away to properly answer. Shortly afterward, Jung-sil excused herself to go to the bathroom, leaving Gongji alone at the table with Yejoo. He realized with a jolt that now it was just the two of them. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to speak. Looking at her earnestly, he told her that he was sorry for earlier. He admitted that she had been the one who got hurt, and he had been so shocked that he had looked away without thinking. He explained that he understood if she doubted him, but if she felt truly angry or wronged, he would accept it, even if she wanted to slap him. As the words left his mouth, Gongji reflected in surprise that the apology had come out naturally, almost without his planning it. He wondered if his gift of the gab skill was influencing him, giving him the sense of perfect timing to say what needed to be said. He also thought about Yejoo's earlier embarrassment, remembering the situation where she had likely realized she was not wearing shorts. He wondered if perhaps she had gone home and realized her mistake, and now his apology might align with her feelings. Yet, to his surprise, Yejoo remained silent, not giving the reaction he had expected. Then, the status window suddenly appeared again. It displayed a message stating that he have earned 50 affection points with Yejoo. Mission reward available. Gongji's eyes widened in shock as he stared at the glowing letters. His mind reeled in disbelief. Had his simple apology truly caused Yejoo to become so affectionate toward him? He could hardly process it, thinking that something so small had suddenly changed the entire balance between them. He felt an odd sense of pride for having invested all his points into the Christmas event, as if his careful planning was finally paying off. In his thoughts, he reminded himself that he had earned 4 points for a positive interaction, and now, with only 1 point left to complete the mission, his goal seemed within reach. He began talking to Yejoo, who had somehow ended up sitting alone, a situation that felt so awkward that he could barely contain his unease. Struggling to maintain composure, he apologized to her, saying he should not have acted the way he did earlier. He expressed his regret, and although his words came from nervousness, they ended up being exactly what she wanted to hear. As a result, Yejoo's affection points increased by 50. In this kind of situation, it was easy to overlook the subtle signs of interest from the other person. Yet he thought to himself that perhaps she was unintentionally flirting with him. Then again, it no longer seemed like a simple hunch. He could clearly notice how much she appeared interested. The thought struck him that he had managed to win over one of the main heroines. His status window confirmed this by displaying an increase of 50 affection points with Park Gongji. Shortly afterward, Yejoo excused herself, mentioning she was heading to the restroom. He acknowledged with a quick and she walked away. As she left, he reflected with a mixture of admiration and embarrassment, describing her in his mind as stiff and expressionless, almost like a wooden doll. His embarrassment deepened as he watched her go. On her way, she was stopped by Jungsil, who pointed out that she was heading the wrong direction. Jungsil told her the bathroom was actually the other way. Yejoo responded politely with thanks before heading properly toward it. Reaching the restroom, Yejoo was overcome with confusion. In her thoughts, she admitted how strange the boy seemed to her. She questioned herself, wondering what was wrong with her own reactions and why she was feeling flustered. She told herself she needed to calm down, breathe, and regain composure. Back at the table, he reflected again. All he had wanted was to complete the mission, yet somehow he had ended up winning her affection. Not long after, Jungsil returned to the table and asked Gongji whether he had finished his beer and if they should get going. Gongji replied that he was done. Suddenly, Namju arrived with an announcement, raising his voice for everyone to listen. He said drinks were available because the club president had called him, mentioning that he was drinking nearby and had invited them all to join. Gongji, surprised, asked if it was true, and Jungsil echoed his surprise, asking whether the president was seriously inviting everyone over so casually. At that moment, Yejoo also returned from the restroom, urging everyone to go together. Jungsil, visibly excited, told her the news, adding that the president was going to treat them. Yejoo remarked that such generosity suited a rich boy like him. Jungsil asked aloud whether the president really intended to pay for everything. Meanwhile, Gongji thought about how unusual this development was. If the president was treating everyone, then perhaps the story had shifted from its original path. He reasoned that his interference might have made him a more substantial character, but he also suspected that the main character was equipped with plot armor strong enough to keep the story intact. Maybe, he thought, no matter how much he influenced Yejoo, the story itself would not drastically change. Then, suddenly, the status window appeared with an urgent mission. He was required to complete a yoga session with the heroine within a given time frame. Seeing this, he thought to himself that he was no longer even surprised by such notifications, but this one carried an unnerving, chilling feeling. Moments later, the status window intensified its warning, declaring that failure would result in his destruction. Shock washed over him as he realized it did not say demotion but destruction, an outcome that felt entirely unfair. As he stared at the glowing message, Jungsil asked Yejoo for her opinion, and she casually responded that she did not really care. Then Jungsil turned to Gongji, asking what was wrong with him. Yejoo, still trying to calm herself, asked softly if he had something to say. Gongji dismissed their concern, saying it was nothing. Namju, however, teased him, telling him not to be such a killjoy since he had already been drinking, and encouraged him to join in the fun. Gongji reluctantly agreed, though in his mind he considered Namju the most troublesome presence among them. Namju, noticing Gongji's distracted look, asked him again what was wrong. Gongji ignored him, choosing instead to focus on the status window. The message repeated relentlessly. He had to complete the yoga session with the heroine, or he would be destroyed. He realized now why he had not yet been upgraded to a minor character, despite successfully clearing 2 missions. It seemed unavoidable. He did not know why events had turned out this way, but he acknowledged that being trapped inside this webtoon left him with no other option. He resolved that he must complete the resistance band session with the heroine, even though he did not know how. Namju once again told him to stop being such a buzzkill and urged everyone to head out. Gongji, startled by his loud insistence, gave in and agreed, and together they all went to the bar where the president had invited them. When they arrived, the president welcomed the group, expressing enthusiasm now that all the freshmen were present. He raised a glass, encouraging everyone to drink, and the group cheered. The president commented that parties were always more lively when freshmen were around. Another member teased him, calling him a boomer and telling him to stop dragging down the atmosphere. Laughter followed. Gongji listened quietly to their chatter, reflecting that all the background characters seemed to be having a great time, while he remained preoccupied with the heavy burden of his thoughts. The president then suggested they start a drinking game, encouraging everyone to join. The random game continued, and at one point, Yejoo protested, asking what it meant that she got something wrong. Another member insisted she was lying and told her to just drink already. Someone asked if anyone would volunteer to be her Black Knight, but another member joked that none of the guys were cold enough to do so. At that moment, Gongji stood up. With determination, he decided he would step in for her. Everyone noticed, surprised at his boldness. In his mind, he declared he would do it for her, that he would be her Black Knight. Yejoo blushed deeply, embarrassed by the attention. The members cheered, praising Gongji as a real man. Strengthened by his resolve, he downed the drink in one go, even pouring beer over his head to emphasize his dedication. He thought to himself that he would reveal his wish to her later, but for now he needed to impress her, having decided firmly to pursue her. The other club members buzzed with excitement, asking each other about his name. Some mispronounced it, calling him Park Kong or something similar, but another corrected them, saying it was Park Gongji. They laughed and clapped, chanting for another round of the random game. This time, it was Jung-sil's turn, and she admitted she got it wrong. A member thanked her honesty and asked if anyone wanted to be her Black Knight. Namju immediately volunteered, saying he would take that role. The members laughed again, remarking that the freshman seemed unusually eager. Some whispered that there might be something going on between Namju and Jung-sil, having heard they were childhood friends. Gongji, watching closely, thought to himself that Namju was acting far more proactive than usual, perhaps because of him. He reflected on how Jung-sil had been explaining to the group that he and Namju were childhood friends. Their bond went way back, yet he admitted that somewhere along the way they had drifted apart and lost contact. After that, at late night, the once lively celebration had turned sloppy as drinks continued to flow. By that point, Namju had become completely intoxicated, unable to keep himself steady. His words slurred, his face flushed, and his body leaned uncomfortably to the side. Jung-sil, concerned for his friend, leaned closer and asked whether he was all right. Yet the answer revealed itself almost instantly. The sight made Gongji's stomach twist. Standing nearby, he found himself overwhelmed by a wave of awkwardness, unsure of where to place his eyes or what to say. That was when he noticed Yejoo slipping away from the chaos, quietly making her way outside the club. Without even thinking twice, he found his steps moving after her. He called out to her, asking if he could accompany her. She turned back, her eyes reflecting a faint surprise, as though she had not expected him to follow. She questioned softly whether he truly wished to come along. He nodded, insisting that he did, giving the simple excuse that they happened to be heading in the same direction. She seemed unconvinced, letting out a small remark of disbelief, but in the privacy of his mind, he admitted to himself that he was lying. The truth was harsher. He knew that if he did not follow her and seize this chance tonight, he would face consequences he could not afford. It was not merely about walking with her. It was about survival in a twisted narrative he could not control. The two of them began walking together along the quiet street. Eventually, she stopped in front of her building. She pointed toward it and told him she had reached home. Her words carried a polite finality, telling him that this was where they would part ways. She advised him to stop drinking for the night, her tone somewhere between gentle and distant. Gongji, however, felt panic rising. If he let the moment slip away now, he would fail. With a forced hesitation, he apologized and then asked if he could use her bathroom, trying to sound pitiful as he clutched at the excuse. She looked startled, her expression betraying surprise at such a sudden and bold request. For a moment, silence lingered as though she were deciding whether or not to accept. He quickly added that he felt unwell, that his body was heavy with sickness, and that he might collapse without a place to recover. His claim softened her reluctance, and eventually she agreed, quickly excusing himself as he darted toward the bathroom. The sound of running water soon echoed as he washed out his mouth, leaning heavily against the sink. As he splashed water across his face, his mind wandered back to the strange mission. He hoped that somehow within this unfamiliar place and with Yejoo just beyond the door, the opportunity for the so-called morning burn session would arrive. The thought both unsettled and drove him, a reminder that his situation was no longer about choice but necessity. Inside the bathroom, Gongji's thoughts spiraled again. He reminded himself that within the original storyline, Jungsil had been portrayed as the number one heroine, her very name symbolizing the first wife. Because of that symbolic meaning, readers who had followed the story halfway through were almost certain that she would eventually end up with the main lead. The only question left hanging in their minds was whether the ending would follow a harem route with all the heroines included or remain a straightforward romance. Gongji reflected bitterly that he used to dislike stories that suddenly threw in elements of NTR, those unexpected betrayals that ruined the intended pairing. He admitted to himself that perhaps the way he had just stolen Yejoo's moment might resemble something like that, but he was quick to push back against the thought. He reminded himself again, this was not NTR because the main lead was not Jungsil, and Yejoo was not even the primary heroine. He thought of how Yejoo Sunbae had always been portrayed as a sub-heroine. It had been almost a year since she had last made a proper appearance because the more prominent heroines overshadowed her presence. Nothing had ever truly developed between her and the main lead, so what he was doing could not really count as stealing her away. Still, he felt a need to justify it, as though repeating these explanations in his head might calm the unease pressing at his chest. Without that rationalization, he knew he would be unable to move forward. His thoughts were interrupted when Yejoo herself came to the doorway, her voice carrying a teasing note as she called him by the nickname she often used, Byunsei. She asked him directly whether he had made a mess of her bathroom. He stared at her for a moment, irritated that she insisted on keeping that nickname alive, but outwardly, he forced a calm response. He assured her that everything was fine, that he felt better now, and even expressed gratitude for letting him use her bathroom. She brushed off his thanks with little interest, telling him firmly that it was late and he should return home. She added that perhaps it was because of his childishness that he didn't know how much he could handle when drinking. Gongji turned toward her, trying to slow the moment down. He casually asked whether she was out of breath, which left her momentarily stunned. She denied it quickly, saying he was mistaken. Yet he could see the faint signs, the way her body betrayed strain, the way her breath faltered, and he immediately thought that she must have hidden her belongings and wounds carelessly inside the closet. He considered opening it under the pretense of an accident, but soon realized that he didn't have the luxury of wasting time. His status window had already reminded him that his remaining time was dangerously short. He decided to speak openly. Calling out to her, he requested a favor. He asked to see where she was hurt. Yejoo froze, clearly taken aback by such a sudden and unusual request. With disbelief on her face, she asked him what kind of wish that was supposed to be. He reminded her that earlier in the night, he had drunk on her behalf, carrying her burden, and this was the repayment he wanted. She dismissed the idea, claiming that it was fine now and unnecessary, but he recognized immediately that she was lying, hiding the truth beneath her usual facade. He pressed further, telling her that she always glossed over her injuries and pretended everything was fine. This time, he insisted on seeing for himself. Her resistance continued for a moment, but eventually, perhaps moved by his persistence, she relented. Turning her back to him, she told him to hurry up and check. He sank to his knees, his hands carefully brushing along her legs as he inspected the injuries. He noted with a pang of guilt how defenseless she appeared, as though she had placed complete trust in him despite the strange circumstances. She spoke lightly, telling him that now he had gotten what he wanted. He should be satisfied and leave, but he shook his head. He told her that his wish had not ended with simply seeing her injuries. She sharply, startled by his words, asking him what he meant. He clarified, stating that what he had asked earlier was for now, and that he still had another wish in mind. With some reluctance, she sighed and told him to go ahead. His next words made her freeze. He confessed that his wish was to kiss the back of her knee. Yejoo was so shocked that she repeated his words in disbelief, asking if he was serious. She even questioned what a knee pit was, and he calmly explained that it was the tender area behind the knee. He framed it as his role, insisting that as her Black Knight, this was his request. Then, almost nervously, he asked whether she hated the idea, reassuring her that if she truly did, he would not press further. His voice was serious, not playful, as he made his request. The atmosphere turned heavy and tense. Yejoo hesitated, clearly flustered by the oddity of his request, but in the end, she gave in. She told him that she would allow it only because he was her so-called Black Knight, but she also warned him sternly. If he ever got a girlfriend in the future, and she discovered he had made such strange wishes, she would undoubtedly be shocked. Gongji, however, muttered inwardly that this was not even his preference, it was hers. He lowered his head and pressed his lips against the back of her knee. As he did so, his mind recalled how in the original novel this very spot had been her special zone, a hidden weak point that created opportunities. He reasoned that this could serve as his shortcut, a necessary path toward the yoga session he needed to reach. Yejoo, however, squirmed uncomfortably, her voice betraying awkwardness as she asked him to stop, pleading that he forget this strange request. But Gongji answered firmly, telling her it was already too late. He could sense that something within her had shifted, that the switch he needed had been flipped. He recognized the signs clearly now. Her defenses had lowered, her emotions were stirred, and the situation had reached its breaking point. With certainty in his mind, he realized they had finally arrived at the yoga session. There was no turning back. He began the session with her, pressed by the urgency of the ticking clock, aware that time was slipping quickly away. During the resistance band session with Yejoo, Gongji kept feeling a strong sense of guilt. He thought to himself that he was sorry, but he had no choice. He had to push through this in order to save his life. His mind kept circling around the mission. He suddenly realized that the clock on the status window had stopped. The glowing letters in front of him displayed that his mission was complete. A heavy breath of relief escaped him. He was alive. Meanwhile, Yejoo watched the whole situation unfold with a troubled expression. She murmured that perhaps this was happening only because of the drinks, reminding him that it was bad for both of them.